March 6, 1945. Cologne is not really a city anymore. It is a maze of stone teeth under a cathedral that somehow still stands. And in the shadow of those twin spires, a German Panther is waiting. Two American Shermans roll toward the open plaza. The Panther fires twice. Both rounds punch through the lead tank. Inside the turret, 3 Americans are gone before the smoke finishes moving. For almost a year, this is what German armor had done to American tank crews. It waited. It aimed. It killed them from distances where their own guns could not reliably kill back. And one street away from that burning Sherman, another American tank is moving through the rubble. Lower, heavier, carrying a 90mm gun that was never supposed to be there. The gunner behind it is 21 years old. His name is Clarence Smoyer. He is not famous yet. He is not supposed to change the argument that had consumed the United States Army for 2 years. But in the next few seconds, he is going to cross an intersection in front of an Army Signal Corps camera and prove, in front of the whole world, that the tank American crews needed had been delayed by their own side. To understand why that shot mattered, you have to go back to Normandy. Not to the generals, not to the factories, to the men inside the Shermans. The M4 Sherman was a brilliant machine in many ways. It was reliable. It was easy to ship. It could be repaired by tired mechanics in muddy fields with tools they already had. American factories could build them by the thousands. And those strengths mattered. But none of those strengths mattered to a crew staring down the front plate of a Panther. The Sherman sat high. Its early 75mm gun was built for infantry support more than heavy armor killing. Even the later 76mm gun did not give American crews the clean answer they had been promised. Against the Panther's sloped front armor, the rounds could bounce. Against the Tiger, they could feel helpless. And a bouncing shell is not just a failed shot. It is a clock starting. It means the German crew is still alive. It means their gun is still loaded. It means your own tank has just announced where it is. American tankers learned to flank. They learned to swarm. They learned to fire smoke, run for side angles, and hope the next round went through before the German gunner found them. They learned all the clever things men learn when they are brave enough to fight with equipment that is not giving them a fair trade. Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the 3rd Armored Division, saw the problem clearly. He told the top command what his crews were seeing. American rounds were hitting German frontal armor and failing. Again and again. Dwight Eisenhower heard the reports and was furious because he had been told the upgraded guns would solve the problem. On paper, the answer had sounded good enough. On a German road, with a Panther's long gun pointed at you, paper did not stop anything. The cruelest part was this: a better American tank was not a fantasy. It was not a late miracle drawn on a napkin after the disaster was obvious. The Army had been working on it for years. In May 1942, even as the Sherman was entering the war, ordnance officers had already approved work on a successor. They wanted a lower tank, a heavier tank, a tank with room for a larger gun, and armor that could stand in the same fight as the German heavies. The experimental line became the T-20 series. It was messy. Transmissions leaked. Drives overheated. Electric systems looked clever until someone imagined maintaining them in mud, snow, and shell fire. But the engineers kept pushing. Then came the idea that changed everything. Take the American 90mm anti-aircraft gun and put it in a tank turret. A weapon built to tear aircraft out of the sky would become the answer to German armor on the ground. By 1943, the design had grown into the T-26, 4 inches of frontal armor, a long 90mm gun, a silhouette lower and meaner than the Sherman, a machine built not merely to support infantry, but to survive the tank fight that everyone in the field already knew was coming. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, the new tank was tested, abused, repaired, and tested again. Senior officials watched it run. The verdict was blunt. It was superior to any tank the United States currently had in service. So why was it not in Normandy? Because inside the army, a different war was being fought, not with shells, with doctrine. Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair was one of the most respected soldiers in America. He was not lazy. He was not stupid. He had built much of the training system that turned civilians into an army. George Marshall called him one of the brains of the army. But on tanks, McNair believed something that the battlefield was already disproving. He believed tanks should not be built to fight other tanks. That job, in his view, belonged to tank destroyers. Fast vehicles, big guns, lighter armor, hit from ambush, then move. Tanks were for infantry, breakthroughs, exploitation. Tanks were not supposed to duel tigers. That doctrine made sense in a manual. It made sense in a conference room. It made sense if the enemy agreed to behave the way the doctrine required. The Germans did not. They put Panthers and Tigers on roads American armored columns had to use. They positioned them behind hedgerows, stone walls, villages, ridgelines. They forced tank versus tank fights because they understood what American crews were being told to ignore. Sooner or later, armored warfare becomes steel facing steel. General Jacob Devers understood that. He pushed hard for the T-26. He warned that the tank-destroyer concept could not carry the entire anti-armor burden in real combat. His argument was simple enough to fit in one sentence. The best weapon against a tank is another tank. McNair disagreed. He saw the T-26 as a burden. Too heavy, too new, too much strain on a supply chain stretching across 3,000 miles of ocean, and most importantly, unnecessary. He did not believe the 76mm gun was inadequate enough to justify the disruption. While that argument went back and forth, American crews kept climbing into Shermans. In September 1943, ordnance pushed for hundreds of T-26 tanks. Army ground forces resisted. In December, George Marshall finally overruled the objections and authorized production. That should have ended the argument. It did not. Even after approval, the machinery of delay kept moving. There were debates about downgunning the tank. There were reliability worries. There were procurement fights. There were always reasons to wait. And every reason sounded responsible when spoken from an office far from the hedgerows. But the cost of waiting was not paid in offices. It was paid inside burning vehicles. In July 1944, during Operation Cobra near St. Lo, McNair was killed by an American bomb that fell short. The most powerful opponent of the heavy tank was gone. But the delay he represented did not vanish with him. Production still did not begin in force until November 1944. By then, Normandy was history. Paris had been liberated. American armor had already fought through months of battles in machines that too many commanders knew were outmatched in the wrong kind of fight. The production model was called the T-26E3. Soon, it would be called the M26 Pershing, and by January 1945, the first 20 arrived in Europe. 20 tanks. That was all. Not enough to change the war. Enough to test the truth. Brigadier General Gladion Barnes, the ordnance officer who had fought for the program, flew to Europe with a special technical team. The mission was called Zebra. The name sounded harmless. The stakes were not. The tanks were split between the 3rd Armored Division and the 9th Armored Division. Crews trained quickly, too quickly. Men who had spent a year learning the feel, limits, and danger of Shermans now had to trust a brand new machine with unfamiliar weight, unfamiliar balance, and a gun that promised to do what they had been begging for. On February 25, 1945, the Pershing entered combat. The legend did not begin clean. It began with a warning. At Elsdorf, a T-26E3 nicknamed Fireball stopped near a roadblock as darkness closed in. A burning Sherman behind it lit the Pershing like a target on a range. A German Tiger fired from close range. One round found the machine gun port in the mantlet, a weak point. The shell tore through. The gunner and loader were killed. Fireball was knocked out. That was the first lesson. The new tank was not magic. Steel still had weak places. A bad angle could still kill. A Tiger was still a Tiger. But the second lesson came almost immediately. Another Pershing crew found a Tiger at roughly 900 yards and killed it with high-velocity, armor-piercing ammunition. Then they caught two Panzer IVs exposed on a road and destroyed them one after another. The gun worked. The armor mattered. And German crews began seeing something they did not recognize. Not the tall, familiar Sherman shape. Something lower, heavier, harder to read through a gun sight. That uncertainty was about to decide the most famous tank duel of the Pershing's war. Cologne, March 6th. The city had been bombed into a stone skeleton. The cathedral still rose above it, black and enormous, like the war had spared it only so it could witness the ending. The German Panther near the cathedral was positioned with professional patience. It watched the approach. It waited for American tanks to enter the open. When the Shermans appeared, it fired. Lieutenant Karl Kellner's tank was hit. 3 men died inside. Kellner survived the first impact, badly wounded, but lost a leg and died later that day. For the surviving Americans nearby, the message was clear. There was a Panther in the plaza. It had the angle. It had the gun. And if another Sherman tried the same approach, more men were going to burn. On a parallel street, Sergeant Bob Early's Pershing crew received the call. Early commanded the tank. Clarence Smoyer was at the gun. John DeRiggi loaded. William McVeigh drove. Homer Davis watched from the bow gun. 5 men inside 46 tons of steel, asked to do in a few seconds what the Sherman crews could not do at all. They did not charge directly into the Panther's chosen lane. That would have been suicide dressed up as courage. Instead, they used the city. McVeigh would drive across an intersection. Smoyer would have only a flash of time to find the Panther, aim, fire, and trust DeRiggi to reload before the German crew could answer. That was the entire plan. 1 crossing, 1 moving shot, no second chance. The Pershing's Ford engine growled under the weight. It was the same basic power family that had pushed Shermans, now asked to move a much heavier vehicle. Not fast, not graceful, but in that moment, it only needed to be fast enough across one deadly opening. Smoyer bent into the sight. The crew could not see the whole battlefield. Tank crews almost never can. They saw slices, corners, smoke, stone, shapes, a gun barrel where no gun barrel should be. Then McVeigh pushed forward. The Pershing entered the intersection. Smoyer saw the Panther. Its long gun was beginning to swing. And then the German commander hesitated. Later accounts suggest he did not immediately recognize the American tank. The shape was wrong. Too low. Too heavy. Not a Sherman. For a fraction of a second, the silhouette did not fit the category in his mind. That fraction was all Smoyer needed. He fired. The first 90mm round struck low, beneath the gun shield. DeRiggi slammed another shell into the breech. Smoyer fired again. The second shot hit near the turret ring. The third round followed almost immediately. At least 2 of the rounds punched through the Panther and out the other side. The German tank shuddered. Then it began to burn. 5 seconds. 3 shots. 1 dead Panther. And the American crew rolled away alive. That is the part most people remember. The duel beneath Cologne Cathedral. the Panther dying on film. The clean visual proof that the Pershing could do what the Sherman had so often been asked to do at terrible cost. But the deeper meaning was not simply that Smoyer was a good gunner. He was. It was not simply that the Pershing was a better tank for that fight. It was. The deeper meaning was that the argument was over. Not in a memo, not in a hearing, not in a general's office. On a ruined street, under a surviving cathedral, a 21-year-old gunner had settled the question with 3 rounds. The tank built for tank fights had just won one. And an Army Signal Corps cameraman, Jim Bates, caught it all. He filmed the destroyed Sherman. He filmed the Pershing crossing. He filmed the Panther burning. Within weeks, Americans at home could watch a German monster die in real time. They saw victory. They did not see the years of paperwork behind it. They did not see the rejected requests, the Doctrine fights, the production delays, the men who had warned that the field was already proving the manuals wrong. But the crews knew. The men inside Pershings knew exactly what had changed. For the first time, an American tanker could look at a Panther or Tiger and believe the fight might be equal enough to survive. Not safe, never safe, but possible. That matters in war more than civilians understand. A crew that believes its gun can work behaves differently. A crew that believes its armor might hold takes different risks. A crew that is not already calculating its own sacrifice has a different kind of courage available to it. The Germans felt the change too. Their crews had spent years exploiting the confidence their armor gave them. Now they were seeing shells bounce less often. They were seeing American guns punch harder. They were meeting the silhouette that did not die according to the old rules. The Pershing still had limits. The King Tiger remained a monster the standard 90mm gun could not reliably beat from the front. Its armor was too thick. Its long 88mm gun was too dangerous. A Pershing crew that met one head-on still needed a flank, a mistake, or luck. And the Army knew it. One experimental answer existed. The T-26E4, later nicknamed the Super Pershing. It carried a longer 90mm gun, so long and heavy the turret needed counterweights. Its crew added improvised armor, including plate cut from a destroyed Panther, welded onto the front in the field. It looked almost wrong. A Pershing with a weapon that seemed too large for its body. Near Dessau in April 1945, that Super Pershing engaged a heavy German tank in a fight that remains debated. Some accounts call the target a King Tiger. Others are more cautious. The battlefield record is incomplete. What matters is not turning uncertainty into legend. What matters is that by the final weeks of the war, American crews were already trying to solve the next problem in the same direct way the Pershing had solved the last one. If the enemy built thicker armor, the answer could not be wishful doctrine. It had to be a gun that could reach it. The Zebra mission tanks fought only a short time before Germany surrendered, but the combat record was powerful. 20 Pershings had gone forward in Europe. Only a small number were knocked out or seriously damaged. Some, like Fireball, were recovered and returned to service. By VE Day, 310 Pershings had reached Europe, and roughly 200 had been issued to units. That was too late to change the outcome of World War II. The outcome had already been decided by production, logistics, air power, Soviet pressure from the east, Allied armies from the west, and the exhaustion of Germany itself. No single tank won that war. But a weapon does not need to change the war to matter. It only needs to matter to the men who would have died without it. That is the uncomfortable center of the Pershing story. It was not late because nobody imagined it. It was not late because American engineers could not build it. It was late because institutions can become loyal to an idea after the field has already outgrown it. And when an institution is wrong, the people at the bottom do not get to debate the theory. They climb into the machine they are given. They drive into the open. They wait to see whether the shell bounces. After the war, the doctrine changed. The tank destroyer branch faded away. The idea that tanks should avoid tank versus tank combat could not survive what Europe had taught. The Pershing became a bridge to the main battle tank concept that would dominate the Cold War. It was reclassified. It was improved. Its descendants became the M46, the M47, the M48, and the M60. The same basic lesson kept moving through steel for decades. A tank needed mobility, protection, and a gun powerful enough to answer the enemy directly. Not three separate theories, one fighting machine. The Pershing itself was not perfect. Korea exposed that clearly. Against North Korean T-34-85s, the 90mm gun was deadly. But the M26 was heavy for its engine. On steep Korean roads and hills, the Ford power plant and transmission struggled. The tank that had arrived late in Europe still carried mechanical compromises from a rushed wartime birth. The answer was the M46 Patton, essentially a Pershing rebuilt with a stronger engine and improved transmission. That is how weapons really evolve. Not as perfect heroes, as arguments in metal. One battlefield exposes a weakness. The next version answers it. But the first argument still matters. Because without the Pershing, the army might have learned the same lesson later, with a higher bill in lives. Clarence Smoyer went home after the war. He was 21 when he fought at Cologne, still 21 when it ended. There was no parade built around him. Most tankers went home quietly. They carried the sound of the inside of a turret in ways they did not explain over dinner. For decades, the film existed, the records existed, the men remembered, but the full story lived mostly in pieces. Then, much later, the Cologne Duel returned to public attention. Smoyer and the surviving legacy of Eagle 7 were honored. In 2019, nearly 75 years after the fight, Clarence Smoyer received the Bronze Star at the National World War II Memorial. He was 95 years old. Think about that distance. A young man fires 3 rounds in 1945. An old man receives the medal in 2019. Almost an entire human lifetime between the action and the official recognition. He died in 2022, at 99, the last surviving member of that crew. The last man alive, who knew what that gun sight felt like in the exact second the Panther appeared. But the Pershing story is not only about Smoyer. It is also about Devers, who kept arguing when the argument was inconvenient. It is about Barnes, who believed the tank should be tested in combat instead of protected from it. It is about Rose, who saw what was happening to his tankers and told the truth upward. And it is about the crews who never got to see the better tank arrive. The ones who fought Panthers with Shermans. The ones who had to flank because their shells could not go through. The ones whose courage was later used to hide the fact that courage had been asked to compensate for delay. The film from Cologne is almost too clean. The Panther waits. The Pershing crosses. The gun fires. The German tank burns. A viewer can watch it and feel the satisfaction of a perfect reversal. But inside that reversal is something darker. The American tank did not simply kill a Panther. It killed an assumption. It killed the idea that Doctrine could overrule the evidence of men already dying in the field. It killed the comfort of saying good enough, from a place where good enough did not have to be driven into enemy fire. March 6th, 1945. A cathedral still standing. A city broken around it. A German tank burning in the plaza. And an American crew alive. Because for once the machine beneath them matched the fight in front of them. The Pershing came too late to save everyone. That is the tragedy. It came early enough to prove everyone who had begged for it was right. That is the legacy, and between those two truths lies the cost of every institution that listens to Doctrine longer than it listens to the men inside the fire.